Thanks, Jen. Jen, are you okay just to press when I say? Is that okay? And everybody, I've got a presentation because if not, I will talk for Scotland and I'll take up everybody's time. And also, I'll get a fog menopause brain and I'll forget stuff. My name's Claire O'Hara and I am the Programme Director of Each and Every Child. I'll just put in a wee link to our website because I don't really want to talk too much about us. I want to share some practice with you. Thanks. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So this is just very quickly who we are. Our focus is on care experience. And the main aims are we want to shift public attitudes towards children, young people and their families in and around the care system so that we can improve support for progressive policy and practice implementation. We want to engage and inform professionals in the sector who work with children, young people and their families around communications, so that they can strengthen those relationships. And finally, and most importantly, we want to support and equip people with experience of care to be at the heart of efforts to develop a more consistent and effective communication so that we can get the support of the wider community and wider society. Thanks, Samantha. So how do we involve what we call voices of experience? We have kind of two strands within the way that we work. First and foremost, we have our management group who have a strategic overview of the initiative. And within our management group, there are our funders, representatives from our funders, from the Robertson Trust, Esme Fairbairn, Life Changes Trust, Scottish Government, Celsius and Social Work Scotland. And we also have two paid consultants who have lived experience of care, but who also bring massive professional experience to the table as well, and the Promise Scotland. And then we have our other group, which is our Voices of Experience reference group, and that's a much more operational role. They work with myself and Michael, who's present here today, and they work with us on a regular basis. And what we've done is we've brought together people who have different experiences of care. Some are quite positive and some are very challenging. But what we also wanted to bring together was people who'd been in different care settings, because public understanding of the care system is very limited to foster care and children's houses. So we wanted to ensure that we had people who had experienced different care settings. Initially, they were coming in to co-design a session that was particularly for people with lived experience of care and how they can use framing to share their stories to affect the change that they want to see. However, and it will come as no surprise, Shamila is on our management group. That lasted all of 45 minutes in the first session. And what we realised is the depth and richness was much wider, and it now impacts on the whole delivery of all the initiative. And this work has continued to influence and will for the rest of our life, the work of the whole initiative. Thanks, Samantha. So just talking to you about our initial stages, when we were doing our recruitment, so we came up with, and I will share a document with you after this, there's two documents that I'm more than willing to share with everyone. And what we looked at is how do we build a trauma responsive approach. So Michael and I had been through several types of training, but as Shamila has always said to us, you learn through practice. So we developed a kind of practice guidance for us, and then shared it with Shamila and Rosie Moore, who also sits in our management group, just for feedback. But our overall approach to everyone was people with experience of trauma, experience of care, do not need to share their own trauma to have a seat at the table, and that they are not the sum of their experience of care, and there are layers to them and their wider life experiences. And make it really clear that it wasn't integral to be part of this group to share your own personal experience. First and foremost, for us, it was about building those relationships. So even before we started, we had individual meetings with everyone. It was really challenging because it was during lockdown. So the normal things that you would do, meeting people for the first time and knowing that we were going to be doing work that could potentially re-traumatise, we really needed to look at how we built our relationships. So the individual meetings we had, we talked about ourselves and we shared our own life journeys, why we were at the place we were at, and talked about the project and things. So we done that initial getting to know us, and then we built our trauma responsive approach. And what we done, because we were just learning about trauma responsive approaches, was we took the key principles and looked at each one of them and how were we doing that and ensuring that that's what we were delivering with. Thanks, Samantha. So we looked at the different parts. So first of all, there was that pre-project support. After we did our initial meetings to start building those relationships, then we met to talk about the initiative on a wider basis, what we were wanting to achieve, why we had approached that person to come along and join us. But we also talked about the elephant in the room, the fact that it was a paid role. So we took people through why we thought it was important that we were paid and how we had set those payment levels, but also discussed about that they want to be paid, because not everybody can take money. So we had that discussion about what was the best way to show that we valued that opinion, but everybody was in a position to actually accept pay. So then we took them through the different ways they can invoice, but we also talked about tax and the implications on tax and benefits to people, making sure that we weren't responsible for that, but people understood. And I think that's a challenge quite often with organisations, is to go, oh, we can't advise on tax. I know we can't advise on tax, but we can share the knowledge that we do have. And it's not just about going, well, here's where you go and look. It's actually about unpicking that and taking people through it. So that was kind of our pre-support. And then once we started to schedule sessions, also we looked at what was a suitable way for people to meet, what was times that were good for them in the day, and also looked at was there any digital exclusion issues, ensuring that people weren't using their phone, because that's really challenging to use your phone and see things, so ensuring that everybody had equipment, and if not, being able to provide that. Then our kind of pre-session support. So once we'd built that relationship, what we done was we always ensured that we sent out what the session plan was, what we were going to be looking at, and if there was any additional reading for people that might be helpful for them. And then had a wee check-in before the meeting, just to ensure that they didn't have any questions or there wasn't any challenges or anything that we could do to support. Then within the session, the first thing that we identified was an awareness of the potential for people to feel uncomfortable, to need to take space and time out. So identified how you could let us know, and online in Zoom you can do direct messaging, and created breakout spaces if people needed that time away, and one of us would be there, the person who was identified at the beginning of the session. We also made it clear that the use of cameras in sessions was a choice, that people didn't have to feel obliged to have them on, and the basic group work of the rules of engagement, but we took that a step further to talk about what we basically call it the Vegas space. What's said in Vegas stays in Vegas, and talked about if you're someone who normally speaks out, take a step back and allow others, and if you're somebody who's normally quiet, try taking that step forward. So we talked about that, and then we also ensured that we had breakout rooms for specific chats, so that maybe people whose voices were quieter, there was that opportunity for us to pick up if they weren't comfortable in the wider group. Just checking, yes, and then one of the things we were doing at the end was talking about where we should take, what the next session should look at, kind of wrap up of what we've discussed, or what the next session should look like, so that we were as a group coming up with session plans. And finally, we wanted to ensure that we had a positive end to workshops and the sessions that we were having because of the conversations. So we always ensured that there was some kind of ending, whether it was an exercise, whether it was covering, or whether it was looking at the positives, what we could do to make change, so that people were left with a feeling of hopefulness rather than hopelessness. And then finally our post-session support. And that again was just a wee follow-up check-in individually with people on how they'd found it, had they had any challenge, what did they find the most interesting, and just kind of had another chat about the session with them. Yep, that was our kind of trauma responsive approach at the beginning. And what I would say about any co-production, co-design work is it's an ongoing learning. We are not at the end. This was how we started. Thanks, Samantha. So, because we were talking about sharing stories, that was one of the first questions we asked. Why do people share their stories? And I'm just going to read out what people within the group had said. Ultimately, I want to influence change and improve the lives of other young people. We need to know what we're getting right and what we are getting wrong. Professionals need to have an understanding of how the system feels for someone within it, its emotional impact. I want to change practice to make it better. It's about impact. It's about providing context that data can't provide. However, one of the other questions that came up was, what is the point of sharing? Is it actually going to make change? And that takes us on to, and Caroline, absolutely picking up on what you were saying. That's when we have to explore power changing, about power sharing. Do people actually have the power to make that change? How do we manage those expectations, and how do we support to ensure that we're getting it right? Thanks, Samantha. So I think the first thing that we had a chat about was why would we as an organisation ask people to share their story? And I don't think that question's answered once. I think we continually look at that question, and any time that we are asking people to share their stories, their experiences, we need to be very clear ourselves on why are we doing that? What are we wanting to achieve? And then we're talking about that power sharing. How do you give people the power back? How do you give them that feeling of choice? So talking about where are they sharing their story and their experience, and what change do they want to see? So is it at a conference? Is it at a service design meeting? Is it with people who design services? So actually unpick, where are they sharing that story? And then by sharing their story, what change are they wanting to see? And this is all before we even look at how we support them to tell their story. And then who's in the room? We all know we walk into rooms and it is an absolute pleasure. I have seen some faces from my past today that have made my heart sing. You know who you are, and I'll catch you at the end. Quite often we go into rooms and we'll know at least one person. Or we'll know the organisation and we'll know a bit about that organisation. Are we ensuring that the people that we are working with have that knowledge? And if they don't, we give them that knowledge. And it's not just about, this is so-and-so, they're the chief executive. This is what this organisation does. Do they have that? Do they have the power to make the change that you want to see? And if they don't have the power, we have to start thinking about who else do we invite in that has the power to make the change. And then finally, what power do you have within that space? And that's a question. So it's always about talking about power. It should never be the elephant in the room. Michael and I, it's a consistent when we are looking at sessions is, what's the power here? What can we change? What can we influence? Even before we start planning sessions. And it's a constant question. And it is a constant question to also check our privilege and look at that and look at the impact. And one of the biggest learning curves and the best thing about working with our group is that we are constantly challenging our privilege, because we see the long-term impact of being within the care system and the long-term impact it has on people when they hit 40, when they're in their 50s. So we're constantly kind of checking our privilege, and we talk about it. And sometimes it's actually about raising that and going, that's not something that impacts, because this is what I would do. My big thing is I'm over 50 and I can still phone my mum. So sometimes people go, I don't know who to ask about that. That's understanding my privilege. Thanks, Samantha. When we get it wrong, and this is one of the questions we asked, was when do you feel not safe? And this is from someone who has shared their experience. And it's something we all need to face into. And I genuinely would hold my hand up in the past for not being strong enough to stand up against others and say, this person shouldn't be sharing their story yet. I wasn't strong enough, I am now. Organisations have placed me in positions when I wasn't mature or savvy enough to know that that situation was harmful. We shouldn't be putting vulnerable people in vulnerable positions, particularly in media and public eye. This can be challenging for young people, particularly when we speak about family members. Organisations and professionals forget that young people are real people, not pawns on a chessboard to be used. It's harsh, but I'm sure we all have experiences where we have been or we have heard someone talking and thinking, that person's not safe, they're not being protected, particularly when we are talking about young people, and I am going to use the experience of care. Depending at the age and stage that they're at, how they speak about their family in a public forum may not be how they're going to speak about their family in 2 or 3 years. And that damage that we can cause to those family relationships, we really need to think about that and what supports that we are putting in place. But this was a real moment in time for all of us in the workshop when this person shared this with us and we had a talk, and other people then spoke about other times that they had felt unsafe. But not to stay in the bad, that's what happens when we get it wrong. So how do we get it right? Thanks, Samantha. Questions about why, those questions I talked about previously in the power session, why, who and what is possible. They should always be at the beginning before we even ask people to be sharing their stories. What power are we given? What power are we sharing? And what power can we challenge? Can we go back to the people who are going to be in that meeting and challenge them before we even have the session? How do we support people to tell their stories and keep them safe and ensure we're not re-traumatising them? What we can do is, it's the questions that we ask when people are preparing what they're going to say. We can bring in that wider context, we can bring in the scale. People quite often talk about what happened just to them. We can ask, has that happened to other people you know in this situation? Is this a wider issue? Because very often what will happen is people in power will hear one person's story and they'll go, I'll fix that, I'm going to fix that. For you, actually what they do is they go back to their office and they phone the workers and go sort that out. But that doesn't make the systemic change, because actually the worker on the other end can go, I can give you another 10 people that are experiencing this. This is not about fixing it for them. This is about a systemic change that we have to do to our service to ensure we're getting it right. So we can support people by helping them bring in that context and that scale. And we can also give them the power of solutions. It's not that we ask people not to tell the most challenging parts, but ask them what support was there, what support wasn't there that should have been there, so that what they are doing when they are sharing their story is they are also given that solution, and they are telling the people in power, the people who have that power to make change, this is a solution. Because quite often people who are listening get lost in the narrative and don't hear. So it's really important that we ensure the change that people want to make is very apparent in the experience that they're sharing. Also thinking back to that previous thing, the previous quote from a person in the group, what are we doing to support media? Are we really thinking about media? Quite often people go, well, we'll have a photograph, we'll get you interviewed. How are we really preparing people for those interviews when they are asked a question that's taking them down a road that they don't want to go? Are we giving people that prep? And also looking at social media, particularly when we're talking about family members, is this going to go out on social media? Are family members going to come back? Are they going to see it, and what are the repercussions? And what safety nets are we putting in place? And then support before, during and after. And this was a big discussion that we had. One of the first things that one of the members of the group said was, we need to model the model. If it was your story that you were sharing it first and foremost, would you be brave enough to stand up and share that part of yourself? And what would safety look like for you? And it is that thing of thinking and it, putting yourself in their shoes. If what would you want? What would be your concerns? Because we all hold stuff in that we don't share, but we're asking somebody to share. So if we were sharing that thing, what would we need? What would we need to put in place? And look at that support. And then there's the obvious things like travel, the space. What does the space look like that the person's going to? Can we take them there? Can we give them opportunities to practice? Can we sort out travel arrangements for them? And it's not just about a taxi. It's about going, do you want me to come and meet you? And we'll go together. And how are you getting home? Always know your escape route. And always ensure that people know how they're going to get home. Is there going to be a Q&A? Is there going to be tea and coffee afterwards where people are going to come and speak to them? Look at those things. And then one of the big things we talked about was that adrenaline rush that people get when they have shared their story. And quite often in this immediate aftermath, people will come up and be like, that was amazing, that was phenomenal. And that adrenaline rush is really good. And you go, how do you feel after sharing that? I feel great. I feel really empowered. How do they feel that night when that adrenaline's left? How do they feel a week later? How do they feel 2 weeks later? And that's what we mean by post support, is we need to check in. And what do we learn to make it better the next time? So it's going, once that adrenaline goes and you're sitting alone at night, or once you start getting a bit of kickback from people, are we still there supporting you? So it's not just about on that day. And are we keeping you informed of what those changes are? What was the result? And have we planned other meetings? Have we said, here's the service redesign meeting. You have influenced them so much, let's get you back around the table. So that's how we are trying to get it right. There will be other ways, there will be other practices. I'm just sharing with you what we're doing. And as I said, it's very much a continuously, we are continuing to learn. What I'm going to share with you, and I'm not going to take you through it because I'm very aware of time, is we then developed with the group a year in our trauma responsive approach as a group to how we go and work in the wider community of people with lived experience. That's when we came up with our values, and it blew me away, the values that they came up with that we will share with you at the end of this. We talked about what our values were and what did that mean in practice, and then we came up with, what does trauma-informed practice look like? What does that mean to us? And then finally, what was our self-care? How would we check in on everybody else? And the very last thing we came up with was different days, different ways. And we have now trained everybody up to facilitate sessions, but what we are acknowledging is one day you might be down to facilitate a session, and that's not a day where you're in that place. And it's that acknowledgement of going, you're still your values, we still value you, we still would like you to attend, but we can take over the presentation and work on that. You will feel a different way, so there's no set way on how we do things, and we will respond to your need. We will send that out to you, and please feel free to come back to us at any point. I've put our our website address in. And the very last thing is, what's the risk if we don't? And this book, if you don't not already using it, I'm going to have a look at it. What if the goal of our social care systems was to learn continuously from and with the people we support? How would that change things? That's what we get when we have equality, when we share our power. and what kind of systems will we create when we are working together. Thanks everybody for listening, and I will share the presentation afterwards. Thanks, Samantha.